Listen, nobody ever tells you about the weird parts of intergalactic military service. They show you the recruitment hollows, with the dramatic space battles and the heroic last stands, and the inspiring speeches about unity among the stars. What they don't show you is 3 in the morning in Barracks 7, when a human is snoring like a malfunctioning plasma engine, and 6 Velcrin Cubs are somehow snoring even louder in perfect harmony. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. I'm telling you this story because somebody needs to. And apparently, I'm the only one stupid enough to admit I was there. My name is Coordinator Thexilan of the Praxis Concordium, which is a very impressive title that means absolutely nothing when you're standing in your underwear at dark 30 wondering if the structural integrity of your sleeping quarters is being compromised by sound waves. I'm a Yulrian, which means I'm about 7 feet tall, covered in iridescent scales that shift colors based on my mood. And I have 4 arms that are absolutely useless when it comes to stopping the chaos that was about to unfold. The human in question was named Marcus Chen, and before you ask, no, I still don't understand human naming conventions. Why do they have 2 names? Why do some of them have 3? Why did Marcus insist everyone call him Mac when that wasn't either of his actual names? These are mysteries that will haunt me until my scales fall off from old age. Mac was assigned to our unit as part of the Terran Integration Initiative, which was the Concordium's fancy way of saying, humans just discovered faster than light travel, and we need to figure out if they're going to be friends or a problem before they accidentally blow up something important. Spoiler alert. They were neither friends nor a problem. They were somehow both, and also something else entirely, that there aren't words for in any of the 47 languages I speak. The thing about humans is that they're aggressively, bewilderingly medium. They're not the strongest species, not the smartest, not the fastest, not the most technologically advanced. They're not even the best at diplomacy, despite what their representatives keep insisting at every council meeting. What they are, however, is spectacularly good at being the most unexpectedly weird species anyone has ever encountered. And they do it with such confidence that you start to think maybe you're the weird one. Mac had been with us for 3 standard cycles, which is about 4 Earth months if you're keeping track. And nobody was keeping track because time is a social construct that different species experience differently, and the Concordium gave up on standardizing it years ago. Point is, he'd been around long enough that we'd all adjusted to his presence. Or so we thought. The Velcrin Cubs arrived on a Tuesday, which I only remember because humans are obsessed with naming their days, and Mac wouldn't shut up about how Tuesday was the worst day for approximately 17 different cultural reasons that made no sense to anyone who wasn't from Earth. The Cubs were part of a youth integration program, because apparently the Concordium decided that having fully grown adults from different species learn to coexist wasn't chaotic enough. So they decided to throw children into the mix. The Velcrin are a species that looks like someone took a bear, a cat, and a teddy bear, threw them in a genetic blender, and added just a hint of aggressively adorable for seasoning. The Cubs were all between the ages of 8 and 12 in standard years, which meant they had the energy of a supernova and the judgment of a concussed spatula. There were 6 of them: Riff, Raff, Pip, Squeak, Tumble, and Breakfast. Yes, Breakfast. I asked about the name. Apparently, he was born during morning mealtime, and his parents thought it would be funny. Velcrin have a very strange sense of humor that mostly involves naming their children after random nouns and then pretending that's normal. Mac took to the Cubs immediately. which should have been my first warning sign. Humans have this thing they do where they see something small and fluffy, and their brains just completely shut down. I've seen Mac face down a hostile boarding party without flinching. But you put a Velcrin cub in front of him, and suddenly he's making nonsense sounds and talking in a weird high-pitched voice, and completely forgetting that he's a trained military operative. "Thanks," he said to me on that first day, holding Pip under one arm like a sack of grain while the cub chewed on his uniform collar. These little dudes are awesome. Little dudes is not proper military terminology, but I'd long since given up on trying to get Mac to follow protocol. The human had looked me dead in all three of my eyes during our first briefing and asked if my species had invented the concept of chilling out yet. I had to look up what chilling out meant. I'm still not sure I understand it. The problem started that first night. Our barracks were designed for communal sleeping, which is standard for Concordia military installations. Privacy isn't really a concept most species care about, and the ones that do usually get over it pretty quickly when they realize that military service involves a lot of sharing spaces whether you like it or not. We had 20 bunks in Barracks 7, arranged in 2 rows, with various species all sleeping in the same room because the Concordium believes that forcing different species to coexist in close quarters builds unity and understanding. What it actually builds is an intimate knowledge of exactly what everyone else sounds like when they sleep. And let me tell you, that's information nobody needs. The Cubs were given bunks near Max, because apparently someone in command thought it would be good for morale and promote cross-species bonding. What it actually promoted was chaos, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I should explain that humans, despite being relatively new to the galactic scene, have a reputation. It started maybe 6 cycles after first contact, when a human merchant crew somehow accidentally started a trade war, solved it, and made a profit all in the same afternoon. Then there was the incident where a human diplomat managed to insult 3 different ambassadors, compliment them, and establish a new economic alliance all in the same sentence. Humans have this way of stumbling through situations that should be disasters and coming out the other side somehow better off than when they started. Mac embodied this principle completely. That first night, I was woken up at approximately 3 hours past lights out by a sound that I initially thought was the barracks ventilation system dying. It was a deep, rhythmic rumbling that seemed to vibrate through the floor and into my bunk. I opened my eyes, trying to adjust to the dim emergency lighting, and listened. The sound continued. Rumble, pause, rumble, pause, rumble. I sat up and looked around. Most of the barracks was still asleep, but I could see a few others stirring. Lieutenant Krixna, a Silthon with excellent hearing, had all 4 of her earstalks pointed directly at Mac's bunk. That's when I realized the human was snoring. Now, I'd heard other species snore before. Gronthar wheeze when they sleep, Pelzian click and whistle. Yulrians like myself occasionally hum. But I had never, in all my years of service, heard anything quite like what Mac was producing. It sounded like someone was trying to start an old combustion engine underwater while simultaneously strangling a musical instrument. It would have been almost impressive if it wasn't so incredibly loud. I was about to get up and wake him, which is the polite thing to do when someone is making noise during sleeping hours, when I heard the second sound. From the Cubs section of the barracks, a small snore echoed out. Then another. Then another. Within the span of about 30 seconds, all 6 Velcrin Cubs had joined in, their tiny snores harmonizing with Mac's thunderous rumbling in a way that should not have been physically possible. It was like listening to a very small, very enthusiastic orchestra playing a symphony composed entirely of sleeping noises. Pip had a high-pitched wheeze that came in short bursts. Raph did this thing that sounded like a purr mixed with a hiccup. Breakfast, and I am not making this up, snored in a way that genuinely sounded like someone saying breakfast over and over again in a tiny, sleepy voice. Squeak managed to squeak with every inhale. Tumble's snore had this rolling quality, like tiny thunder. And Riff, bless his small, fluffy soul, snored in perfect rhythm with Mac, like they'd practiced. I looked at Crixna. She looked at me. Her bioluminescent spots were flickering in a pattern that I recognized as suppressed laughter. "Are they?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the snoring. "Are they doing that on purpose?" I had no idea. With the Cubs, it could go either way. Velcrin young are notorious for mimicking other species, and they find humor in the strangest things. But they also looked genuinely asleep. The snoring continued. Mac hit a particularly loud crescendo, and all 6 cubs responded with their own tiny roar of sleep sounds. Across the barracks, I started to see movement. People sitting up in their bunks, eyes opening. The universal look of what is happening right now, spreading across the multiple species' faces. Sergeant Morick, a Granthar who served as our unofficial barracks parent despite being the youngest person in the room by chronological age. Granthar, mature weird, sat up and just stared at the scene. His faceplates were doing the thing they do when he's trying to process something that breaks his understanding of reality. "Coordinator Thex," he rumbled, his voice a deep bass. "Why are the Cubs snoring?" "They're sleeping, Sergeant?" "They're snoring with the human." "I'm aware." "In harmony?" "Yes." "Why?" I didn't have an answer. I still don't have an answer. But I was about to get up and do something about it when Specialist Vreen, a Pelsian who communicated primarily through color changes in her skin, started giggling. The sound was soft at first, but it spread through the barracks like a contagion. Crixna snorted, then covered her mouth with 2 of her 6 hands. Morick's faceplates started clicking, which is what Granthar do when they're laughing. Corporal Zine, who was usually the most serious person in our unit, made a sound that I can only describe as a wheeze of delight. Within minutes, half the barracks was awake and trying desperately not to laugh loud enough to wake the snorers, which just made everyone laugh harder. It's a weird thing, laughter. Every species does it differently. Some make sounds, some change colors, some release pheromones, some vibrate. But somehow, in that moment, we were all doing the same thing. We were all losing our minds over a human and 6 cubs creating the worst symphony in galactic history. Max snored on, completely oblivious. The cubs matched him note for note. And that's when breakfast rolled over in his sleep and fell out of his bunk. The tiny Velcrin hit the floor with a soft thump and just kept snoring, now lying on his back with all 4 paws in the air. His snore never even hiccuped. He just continued making his tiny breakfast, breakfast, breakfast sounds while lying on the cold barracks floor like he'd planned it that way. That was it. That broke us. Crixna laughed so hard she fell off her bunk. Morick was making these deep, booming sounds that shook his whole frame. Vreen's skin was cycling through colors so fast she looked like a disco ball, which is a reference I only understand because Mac won't shut up about human parties. Even Corporal Zine, stone-faced Zine, who I'd once seen stare down a hostile negotiation without blinking, was lying in her bunk with tears streaming down her face. I tried to maintain some dignity. I really did. But then Riff started sleepwalking, still snoring, moving in slow circles around his bunk while perfectly harmonizing with Mac's latest snore crescendo. And I lost it completely. All 4 of my arms gave up on supporting me, and I just collapsed back onto my bunk, shaking with silent laughter. This continued for approximately 15 minutes. 15 minutes of the most ridiculous concert anyone has ever witnessed. accompanied by the muffled laughter of 20-some military personnel who were absolutely losing their minds trying to stay quiet. Then Mac stopped snoring, sat bolt upright in his bunk, and said in a completely normal voice, "Anyone else smell toast?" Dead silence. Every single person in the barracks froze. The Cubs continued snoring, but every awake person just stared at Mac. "What?" he said, looking around at all of us. "Why is everyone awake?" "You were snoring," Crixna managed to say between gasps of laughter. Mac blinked. "Was I loud?" "You sounded like a dying starship engine," Morik said, still chuckling. "The Cubs joined you." Mac looked over at the Cubs' bunks. Breakfast was still on the floor, still snoring, paws still in the air. Riff had sleepwalked himself into a corner and was snoring at the wall. The other four were in various states of impossible sleeping positions, all of them making their tiny chorus of sounds. "Huh," Mac said. He sounded genuinely surprised. "That's adorable." "Adorable," Corporal Zine repeated, wiping tears from her eyes. "Chen, you just orchestrated the most chaotic sleeping performance in military history, and you think it's adorable." "I mean, look at them," Mac said, gesturing at breakfast. "Little guy fell out of bed and didn't even wake up. That's peak comedy." He wasn't wrong, but I wasn't about to admit it. Mac climbed out of his bunk and gently picked up breakfast, who continued snoring the whole time, and placed him back in his bunk. The moment breakfast was horizontal again, he rolled onto his side, curled into a ball, and the snoring got somehow quieter and more adorable. "There we go, little dude," Mac whispered. "Sleep tight." Then he looked at the rest of us, seemed to realize that we were all staring at him, and had the decency to look embarrassed. "Sorry about the snoring. Happens sometimes. Usually means I'm super tired or I ate too much before bed. In this case, both. The mess hall had that weird purple stuff that you guys said was basically space pizza, and I got carried away." "Space pizza?" I repeated flatly. "Yeah, that's what I'm calling it. It's pizza adjacent. It's nutrition gel." "Pizza adjacent nutrition gel," Mac corrected. He stretched, yawned, and somehow looked more awake than he had any right to be for someone who'd just been snoring like a broken machine. "Well, since we're all up, anyone want to hear about the time my sister convinced me that clouds were made of cotton candy when I was 6 and I tried to eat one?" "Absolutely not," said Crixna, but she was smiling. "Go back to sleep, Chen," Morik said, but there was no heat in it. Max shrugged. "Fair enough. Night, everyone." He climbed back into his bunk, rolled over, and within approximately 45 seconds, started snoring again. The Cubs, as if on cue, joined back in. This time, nobody even tried to hold back the laughter. We just let it happen. What else were we going to do? Wake him up again? The human was dead asleep. The Cubs were committed to their performance. We were all too tired and too amused to do anything but accept our fate. And here's the thing, the weird, unexpected thing that I didn't realize until much later. It was nice. In a completely chaotic, absolutely ridiculous way, it was actually nice. We were all awake in the middle of the night, laughing at something completely stupid. And for those few minutes, it didn't matter that we were different species from different worlds with different cultures. We were just people, or whatever the multi-species equivalent of people is, enjoying something absurd together. That's the thing about humans. They don't build unity through grand speeches or careful diplomacy or shared struggles, though they do all of those things too. Sometimes they build unity by snoring so loud that it wakes up everyone. makes 6 cubs harmonize in their sleep, and turns a barracks full of hardened military personnel into giggling messes at 3 in the morning. It's not the unity the Concordium planned for. It's not the cross-species bonding the recruitment holos promised. But it's real. And it's ours. And it happened because a human ate too much pizza-adjacent nutrition gel and had the lung capacity of a small spacecraft. The rest of the night was surprisingly peaceful. Mac and the Cubs continued their snore symphony, but everyone else managed to fall back asleep. You get used to strange noises in the military. After a while, the sound of a human and 6 cubs snoring just became the new normal background noise of Barracks 7. Morning came too early, as it always does. The wake-up alarm blared through the barracks, and everyone groaned and stumbled out of their bunks to start the day. Mac woke up looking refreshed and cheerful, which was deeply offensive to everyone who'd been woken up by his snoring and then struggled to fall back asleep. The Cubs woke up with the kind of instant energy that young beings always have, bouncing around their bunks and chattering excitedly about absolutely nothing in particular. Breakfast seemed completely unaware that he'd fallen out of bed, and when Morik mentioned it, the little Velcrin just shrugged and said, "I do that sometimes." "Do you also snore the word breakfast over and over?" Krixna asked. Breakfast tilted his head. "What's a snore?" We tried to explain. He didn't believe us. Young Velcrin apparently don't think they make sounds while sleeping, and no amount of explaining could convince him otherwise. Riff insisted he never left his bunk all night. Pip wanted to know why everyone looked so tired. Mac, to his credit, apologized for the snoring. "My roommate in training used to throw stuff at me," he said. "You guys are way more chill about it." "Your roommate threw things at you?" I asked. "Yeah, like pillows and socks and once a boot. It never worked, though. I'm a heavy sleeper." He said this like it was a completely normal thing, which, I was learning, was very typical for humans. They treat absolutely wild situations as casual everyday occurrences. "Chen," Morik said slowly, "you snore loud enough to wake 20 people, and you're a heavy sleeper?" "Oh yeah, super heavy. One time there was a fire alarm in my building and I slept through it. My neighbor had to break down my door." Silence. Everyone just stared at him. "You what?" Corporal Zine said. "Slept through a fire alarm. To be fair, it was a false alarm, but yeah. I woke up to firefighters standing in my apartment yelling at me." Max smiled like this was a fond memory. "They were not happy. Wrote me up for being a safety hazard." "That's concerning on multiple levels," I said. "Yeah, I've been told." That should have been the end of it. One night of chaos, a funny story to tell, everyone moves on. But the universe, I have learned, has a sense of humor that specifically targets people who think things can't get weirder. That night, Max snored again. The Cubs harmonized again. This time, though, 2 things changed. First, Riff didn't sleepwalk. He sleep-climbed. I woke up to find the tiny Velcrin cub somehow perched on top of the light fixture in the center of the barracks, still snoring, defying several laws of physics and all common sense. How did he get up there? Nobody knows. He was asleep the entire time. Second, the snoring started to attract attention from outside our barracks. Around midnight, there was a knock on our door. I dragged myself out of bed, stepped over Breakfast, who had once again fallen out of his bunk, and opened the door to find 3 members of Barracks 8 standing there in their sleeping clothes. "Is everything okay in there?" one of them asked. She was a Zelton, species that communicated partly through electromagnetic pulses, and her concern was pulsing off her in waves I could actually feel. "We heard sounds." From behind me, Mac let out a snore that I swear shook the door frame. All 6 cubs answered in perfect harmony. Riff, still on the light fixture, somehow snored louder than he had any right to from that position. The 3 visitors from Barracks 8 just stared. "That's normal?" I said tiredly. "That's normal?" the Zelton repeated. "That's normal." They looked at each other. Then, slowly, they started to smile. Then giggle. Then laugh. "Can we?" one of them asked between laughs. "Can we listen for a minute?" I probably should have said no. Should have maintained some kind of professional boundary. Should have sent them back to their own barracks. Instead, I stepped aside and let them in. They stood there in our barracks for a solid 5 minutes, just listening to the Mac and Cubs Snore symphony, trying desperately not to laugh loud enough to wake anyone up. At one point, Pip rolled over and did this little chirp-snore combination that broke all 3 visitors completely. They left eventually, tears streaming down their faces or equivalents, thanking me for the entertainment. I went back to bed and stared at the ceiling, wondering how my life had reached this point. The next night, 6 people from other barracks showed up. Word had spread. The human who snored like a dying engine and the cubs who harmonized with him had become barracks legend in less than 48 hours. Mac, somehow, remained completely oblivious to all of this. He'd wake up every morning, cheerful and refreshed, completely unaware that he'd spent the night being the galaxy's most chaotic sleeping performance artist. By the 4th night, we had 12 visitors. They brought snacks. Somebody brought a recording device, which I immediately confiscated because that felt like it crossed several ethical lines. But the fact that they'd thought to bring it at all showed how out of hand this had gotten. "Thanks," Crixana said to me on the 5th night, after we'd politely but firmly turned away a group of 20 people who wanted to watch the snoring. "This is getting ridiculous." "I'm aware. Should we do something?" I looked at Mac, sleeping peacefully, snoring like a malfunctioning industrial machine. I looked at the cubs, curled up in their bunks, doing their tiny chorus. I looked at Breakfast, who had achieved his nightly ritual of falling onto the floor and continuing to sleep there. "What would you suggest?" I asked. She thought about it. "Move them to a different barracks? Where everyone doesn't know about the snoring, so we can start this all over again?" Point taken. Wake Mac up and ask him to stop. Can humans control their snoring? I have no idea. Neither did I. Human biology was still pretty mysterious to most of us. They had so many weird quirks and strange biological features that Concordia medical staff were still figuring them out. In the end, we decided to do nothing. Mostly because we were too tired to figure out a solution, but also because, strange as it sounds, the barracks had started to feel more cohesive. Everyone was in on the joke. Everyone knew about the snoring. It had become our weird shared experience. The visitors eventually stopped coming after we put a sign on the door that said, "Sleeping hours, no visitors. Yes, we know about the snoring." Max saw the sign, looked confused, and I had to explain the entire situation to him. "Wait," he said, looking genuinely baffled. "People were coming here to listen to me sleep." "To listen to you and the cubs snore, yes. That's weird." "You're weird, Chen." "Fair point." Then he asked the question I'd been dreading. Should I do something about the snoring? The entire barracks had been listening to this conversation. I saw Crixna shake her head frantically. Morik made a gesture with his faceplates that I interpreted as absolutely not. Even Corporal Zine, who I'd expect to support any measure that would improve sleeping conditions, looked like she was against the idea. "No," I said, surprising myself. No, I think we're good. You sure? I could try sleeping on my side or something. Don't you dare, Crixna said. Mac looked around at all of us. Okay, so just to be clear, my incredibly loud snoring that I was apologizing for is actually something everyone wants me to keep doing. Yes, said about 7 people at once. And the Cubs joining in is also fine? Encouraged, Morik added. Huh. Mac processed this. You guys are weird. Says the human, I muttered. That night, Mac snored. The Cubs harmonized. Riff's sleep climbed onto the light fixture again, which we just accepted was going to be a regular thing now. Breakfast fell out of bed. Pip did her chirp snore. Raff hiccup purred. Tumble rolled. Squeak squeaked. And breakfast nestled on the floor because nobody had bothered to pick him up anymore since he'd just fall out again anyway, continued to sleepily whisper, breakfast, 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 throughout the entire night. And the barracks, all of us, every single person, slept soundly despite the noise. Or maybe because of it. Because that's the thing about belonging somewhere. It's not always quiet. It's not always comfortable. Sometimes it's loud and chaotic and makes absolutely no sense to anyone outside looking in. But it's yours. And that makes it perfect. 3 cycles later, when the Cubs were scheduled to leave and return to their home station, everyone in Barracks 7 signed a petition to have them permanently assigned to our unit. The Concordium approved it, though I suspect they had no idea what they were agreeing to. Max served with our unit for 6 more standard years. He eventually learned to sleep on his side, which reduced the snoring by about 30%. The Cubs grew up, and their snoring changed as they matured. But they never stopped harmonizing with Mac when they slept near him. Breakfast continued falling out of his bunk until he was 14, at which point he finally outgrew his bunk and had to get a larger one that was apparently too big to fall out of. He was disappointed about this. We were all a little disappointed too. I tell this story because someone asked me once what the Terran Integration Initiative really accomplished. They wanted to know if humans had brought advanced technology or new military tactics or diplomatic innovations. And I guess the answer is yes to all of those things. Humans did bring a lot to the Concordium. But what I remember most, what I think actually mattered most, was a human named Marcus Chen, who snored loud enough to wake a barracks and somehow turned it into the best sleep any of us ever had. That's very human when you think about it. Taking something that should be a problem and making it into something that brings people together. They do it without trying, without even realizing what they're doing. They just exist in their chaotic, snoring, too loud, too weird way, and somehow make everyone around them better for it. When I retired from the Concordia military, Mac gave me a recording. I'd confiscated so many over the years that I'd stopped keeping track, but apparently he'd made one himself on his personal device during one of those early nights. Thought you might want it, he said. You know, to remember us by. I listened to it once, alone in my quarters on my last night of service. It was exactly as chaotic and ridiculous as I remembered. Mac's thunderous snoring, the Cubs' tiny harmony, Breakfast's sleep whispering of his own name, and underneath it all, the soft sound of 20-some people trying not to laugh. I still have that recording. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I play it. And every single time, it makes me smile. Because that's what humans do. They snore too loud. They make friends with alien cubs. They turn sleeping into a spectator sport, and somehow, impossibly, they make you miss them when they're gone. If you ever meet a human, here's my advice. Be patient with them. They're going to be weird. They're going to do things that make no sense. They're going to snore loud enough to wake an entire building and somehow make everyone okay with it. But they're also going to make your life better in ways you never expected and can't quite explain. And years later, when you're alone and tired and missing the chaos, you'll pull up a recording of a human snoring and 6 cubs harmonizing and 20 people trying not to laugh. And you'll realize that somewhere along the way, in the middle of all that noise and chaos and weirdness, you found family. That's humanity, folks. They're loud, they're messy, and they'll keep you up at night. But you'll sleep better for it. Trust me on this one.